Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. And I'm your host, Mike Allen. Well, maybe you've heard of Lake Waubeeka. It's an extremely unique gated community in the gorgeous hills of southern Danbury. It's got one of the most pristine recreational lakes in western Connecticut. It was the summer home to one of this country's most famous musical artists, and it was built by Jewish firefighters from New York City. Our guest today covers the bases on this story in remarkable fashion. Jeffrey Gurok is not only an esteemed professor of Jewish history, he's also part of one of the families that dates all the way back to the very beginning of Lake Waubeeka back in the 1950s, and he still owns a summer home there. He's a prolific writer, having authored 25 books, including Lake Waubeeka, A Community History, and he's got an upcoming one, Marty Glickman, The Life of an American Jewish Sports Legend. Jeffrey's going to be along with the fascinating Lake Waubeeka story in just a moment. This week's trivia question: ultimately, you burn them, yet you shouldn't leave them in the sun for too long. What are they? Stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you'll know the topic for next week's show. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is brought to you by our sponsor, Yale New Haven Health. Yale New Haven Hospital was the very first hospital in Connecticut. They opened their doors 200 years ago and later introduced the entire country to the use of penicillin and chemotherapy. Today, some of the brightest minds in medicine choose to work there, and it's the primary teaching hospital for the prestigious Yale School of Medicine. For more information, log on to ynhhs.org. That's ynhhs.org. If you've ever driven Route 7 from Ridgefield into Danbury, well, you've snaked between two of the higher peaks in Fairfield County. Now, it may be a little bit of overkill or stretch to call the peaks majestic, but to me at least, there's a certain visual impact that they have on you as you enter that part of Connecticut that's more or less the barrier between the flat, sandy land of Long Island Sound and the hillier parts of northwest Connecticut. Well, nestled amongst these rather stunning hills is a 600-acre gated community that's located in a quiet, scenic, out-of-the-way area that's, at least for me, frozen in time. Now, the visionaries who set their sights on this property and developed it into the unique and special gated community it is today, well, they had a great eye for what's possible. They bought a hilly and rocky expanse of land with a very large lake in the middle of it. And in fact, if you're an outdoors type, it's love at first sight. And what they created out of this, though, remains some 70 years after the fact, a remarkably serene and special getaway location. Well, just who were these visionaries? They were members of the New York City Fire Department, and not just any members, the Jewish members. And there were enough of them to pool their financial resources together to buy the land, and enough of them to contribute their brute strength to clear the land and shape it into roads, houses, a community hall, recreational fields, and 2 beaches on the lake. Now, why they did it, we'll get into that in just a minute with our guest today. First, I want to point out that we're going to be revealing the name of one of this country's most famous musical artists, a woman whose family was amongst the pioneers who built Lake Waubeeka and who has one of the community's roads named after her, not because she's famous today, but rather simply because she was the daughter of one of the community's founders back then. Our guest is Jeffrey Gurok. Jeffrey's father was one of those Jewish firefighters who first came up from Bensonhurst, Queens to Danbury to build and populate Lake Waubeeka, first as a summer community and now as a year-round community. Jeffrey is a professor of Jewish history and author of the book Lake Waubeeka, A Community History. Jeffrey, I want to start off talking about what is an unbelievably unique backstory about something that some people may call it a gated community, but that would be completely missing the point. And the other amazing part to this, and we'll get into all this, is that it's somehow, at least to me, seems to be a little bit frozen in time. And it's kind of stayed the way it's been for, almost, more than half a century. And we're talking about a 600-acre gated type community. You do have to have a, password to get in. 50-acre lake, you got 2 beaches, 250 houses, The property was purchased, and this just kills me, for $90,000 back in the 1950s. And then when you take all this and do the backstory, let's start off with what is it that makes this such a unique area?
Well, Lake Waubeeka was established in 1951 by a very ambitious group of Jewish firemen. Your listeners may not realize that during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, hundreds of Jews were in the fire department. It was a depression job. My dad was one of those original firemen who thought of Lake Waubeeka off Route 7 in Danbury, Connecticut. It was in 1951 or 1950, there was a polio epidemic in New York City, and these firemen realized that they wanted to get their kids, and not to mention adults, out of the city. So they found this plot of land which had not been developed. And with the help of the government, with FHA loans, etc., they started building this community. I'm celebrating my 72nd year there as a resident. I came there at age 1, I guess it was, and there are 12 families left who were original families, but the spirit of Lake Waubeeka continues. It's a very happy community. Spend my summers there, and every time I approach my house, which I inherited from my parents along with my brother, brings back wonderful memories of growing up, and a tribute to them and to the foresight of these crazy firemen who built this community. How many people can say they have friends for over 70 years? My next door neighbors, we've been friends our entire life. It's a wonderful place with wonderful memories. I hope it continues forever.
Now, let's try and put this in a little bit of perspective, because what ended up happening was, I guess the firefighters were based at a firehouse in Bensonhurst, Queens, from what I understand. And they worked behind this guy, Sid Klein, and we're going to keep that a little bit quiet until the end because I don't want to give away who his daughter was until the very end. But Sid decided to put this whole thing together, and they asked for what at the time I guess was, you had to scrape it together, $10 for a deposit for sort of a down payment with a first come, first serve. It seemed like a brilliant way to get people involved with this.
So my dad came back from a Ner Tamid Society meeting. Ner Tamid meets Eternal Light, which was the Jewish firemen's fraternal organization. And he told my mother, I put down $10. We have ourselves a bungalow, $10. And that was the beginning. And they were able to scrape up enough money to have a bungalow. There were no roads. The men themselves built those roads. I did a book about Lake Waubeeka, and I have pictures of the men actually scraping the rocks off the road so we could have the first roads up to our one of our two beaches. So it was something very exciting, and just $10 got you started. A very different era. It's a baby boomer era. There are so many kids on my block. The day started, you'd hear a basketball bouncing on the street or a softball on the street, and all the kids came out and played ball. Someone said to me, we were campers without counselors. We're on our own. And on the weekends, there were very competitive softball leagues. And one of the big things for me was when I was 16 years of age, I managed a kids team against my father in the iconic men's softball league on Sunday. Opening game, I brought my guys over. I said, listen, guys, my father's team are a bunch of old men. Don't hit the ball hard. Just smack it on the ground. We scored 9 runs in the first inning.
I love it. Going back for a second, let's talk about the development here a little bit more. So, originally, Danbury wasn't necessarily going to be the location. They put ads in the newspaper saying, we're looking for land to build a summer camp. And we're looking around, and I guess Peekskill, Poughkeepsie, White Plains, Newburgh, all New York locations. And then it ended up in Danbury. I guess it was Herman Kellogg's estate, which is this beautiful location in southern Danbury. How did they get to that?
They put an advertisement in the wonderful Danbury News Times, and they got some solicitations. Yes, you're right. At first, they thought of a summer camp in Peekskill, but then they realized that, you know what? Why just develop an area for children? How about kids and parents together? The area was bought for a pittance in comparison to what things are today. And the first 150 houses that were built the same way, just a shell. and everyone had to improve the interior of the house on their own. And there was a great sense of community. People helped each other build their houses. And I always tell people that if you had a flickering black and white television set in your house and you decided on a particular evening to go out to the movies or Marcus Dairy, which we always frequented, which was this great milk plant off Route 7, and you came home, you could have your neighbor sitting in your living room, small living room, watching your TV. The doors were open. There were no locks. There were no locks on the door. Everybody knew everybody else. And again, there was this camaraderie of the firemen. But it wasn't only firemen. Then we invited in cops, and we invited in teachers, and that built the community. And at that point, the community was 99% Jewish, although for a long time, the president of the community was a Christian named Pete Dottie. Today, Lake Waubeeka is not that way at all. We don't do statistics on ethnicity or race, color, or national origin, but my sense is that maybe half of the residents are Jewish and the other half are not Jewish. Everybody gets along quite well, quite well. Most of these Jews were secular Jews, and although a group built a synagogue, which led to some controversy, not between Jews and Gentiles, but between Jews and Jews over whether or not we want this to be more than just a summer community, but a religious community as well. And we have a wonderful archive. Whoever heard of a summer community with an archive? Our next door neighbor, who was a forensic photographer for the police department, taught himself archival work. So when I decided to do this work, I went to our community house, opened the door to that area, and all the records were there. So I have my memories, but it's buttressed by the fact that Lake Waubeeka has kept very, very good records over the years, which facilitated my doing my history.
What's the significance or the source of the name Waubeeka?
That was the original name that we found in Waubeeka. It's on Mount Moses, Moses Mountain, which is pretty funny considering the fact that so many of the people were Jewish, Mount Moses. But that goes back to, I believe, the 18th century. That was the original Native American name for the community. The high waters or high mountains. The lake is really a pond. It's only, as you say, it's 50 acres. It's not nearly as big as Candlewood Lake. And we have two beaches, and that's the way it is.
So let's go back and talk about Sid Klein and his family. And one of the precursors to this discussion is that after these roads were built, I guess it was either the members of the board of directors or certainly the people who had led the charge in getting this place built in the first place were allowed to name the roads after their children. And Sid Klein named his road Carroll Road. And can we talk now about who was Carroll?
All the streets are named for original board members. There's a Jeffrey Street, which is not named after me. It's named after Jeff Pine. There's Marion Street. There's Arthur Road. And Carroll Street was named for one of the young girls who was a very good singer who participated in our plays and in our sing-alongs. And today she's Carole King, the very famous songwriter and singer. I think she's the only person who's won Grammys both as a songwriter as well as a singer. And legendarily, I can't prove it, but since she's about 10 years older than me and Sid Klein and my dad were friends, I always tell people that Carole King babysat for me. It's possible. But she was just one of our kids. And in fact, we have a picture of her in the book. And it's interesting, since she's a public figure, people on my committee who helped me do this book were concerned that we had this picture. Could we use it since she's a public figure? So we contacted her agent, and the agent got back to us the next day and said, Carol's thrilled to be in the book. So no one's suing anybody. She's very happy to be part of the history of Lake Waubeeka. But yeah, Carole King is our famous Waubeekan. And we're not interested in fame. We're interested in community and enjoying life together, which has been, a blessing for us for now over 70 years.
Carol Street in Lake Waubeeka is spelled Carol. That's not like how Carole King spells her name today, Carole. Well, she changed that at the same time that she changed her last name to form her professional career name of Carole King, when she used to be Carol, Carol Klein. Well, of course, she's one of the most prolific songwriters in history, not only penning her own hits like I Feel the Earth Move, You've Got a Friend, and It's Too Late. Her album Tapestry, if you know it, is still amongst the most popular ones ever recorded. But what you may not know about Carole King is how many hit songs she wrote for other artists, songs that you've heard that you may not know that she was behind them. For instance, the Shirelles, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? Carole King wrote that when she was just 17. Bobby V's Take Good Care of My Baby. Do the Locomotion with Little Eva. Up on the Roof, The Drifters. The Monkees hit Pleasant Valley Sunday. And perhaps the greatest of all, Aretha Franklin's You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. My thanks to today's guest, Jeffrey Gurock, a professor of Jewish history and member of one of the original families of Danbury's Lake Waubeeka community. He's also a prolific author of no fewer than 25 books. Don't miss his latest coming out, Marty Glickman, The Life of an American Jewish Sports Legend. The answer to this week's trivia question, well, the question was, ultimately, you burn them, yet you shouldn't leave them in the sun for too long. What are they? Well, the answer is tobacco leaves. And they are the ones that are turned into cigar wrappers, at least here in Connecticut, a specialty like you won't believe. Next week on Amazing Tales CT, it turns out that Connecticut is a natural for growing the best such leaves in the world, for a very special reason, which we'll tell you all about next week. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and stay healthy.